Well, Steve Keen is certainly a man of many surprises, isn't he, Ian? And his latest is that he is going to stand for the Senate in New South Wales. So he's packing his bags and heading back to Australia just as soon as they start letting people back in. So is this a good move from an academic to a politician, from developing and challenging theories to creating sound bites for TV? How's that going to work out for him? Well, today we find out why he's doing it and what he hopes to achieve today in this free edition of the Debunking Economics podcast. Well, we couldn't really charge for it, could we? Because it's basically a party political broadcast. That's today. So sometime next year, Scott Morrison, the Australian Prime Minister, is going to call an election. And there are two houses that people vote for in Australia. There's the House of Representatives, where you vote for your local member. So it's geographically based, just like it is in the UK and many other parts of the world. Then there's the Senate, which is a bit like the House of Lords, except it's the second chamber, but it's not an old folks' home for people who've not been voted in by the public. In Australia, the Senate is, first of all, they're a bit younger, and they're voted for on a state-by-state basis, on the basis of proportional representation. And Steve hopes to be one of those representatives in the Senate from next year as a representative of a party called the New Liberals, which in many countries is a name that would make sense. But remember, Liberal in Australia is a party that sits to the right of the centre, whereas the New Liberals are not in the same sphere at all, or they won't be should they get elected, because it is a brand new party. So we'll talk about the name in just a second. But Steve, the obvious question, why? I mean, you are an academic. You have the luxury of time to explore ideas and discuss them and explain the reasoning, which is, what you've been doing on the blog and we've been doing in the podcast. Whereas if you are a politician, well, I just think you get less credibility for your ideas as a politician, because everyone assumes politicians are out for themselves, whereas they don't assume the same for academics. Because if you were out for yourself, you wouldn't be choosing a profession that paid so badly.
Yeah, I mean, well, it was certainly not a deliberate decision, because what actually happened was that I was approached by Victor Klein, who's the guy who founded the New Liberals, and the reason it turned out to be that he's somebody who's a very complicated life story. And I for people who in Australia who are saying, what is this party, the New Liberals? Who is this guy, Victor Klein? You can buy a book that tells you what Victor Klein is. His autobiography called The House on Anzac Parade. But anyway, that's the long of it. The short of it is that he, in the middle of deciding that he just had to form a political party to get rid of the duopoly of Labor in Liberal in Australia, which is effectively Democrats and Republicans in the United States. He couldn't just rely on the law side of things. He had to stand economics as well and a whole range of other issues. So as you do these days, you dive into Google and see what you can find. Then he found me and found my work debunking economics. So he approached me after reading Debunking Economics and also being in touch with a range of people in the modern monetary field, including Bill Mitchell in Australia, and also coming to accept modern monetary theory. And then he, so out of all that, out of the blue, he asked me, would I be willing to be their economics advisor? That was in April of this year, so April 2021. And I'd seen a few of his tweets, and I like what I saw. It's actually quite an aggressive tweet that he has pinned to his profile, which talks about, we're not going to just, the Australians would remember Don Chipp, who was a member of the Liberal Party.
Well, exactly. And in fact, and he started, it was actually, before they became the Democrats, they were the New Liberals, weren't they? That's where they,
I'm not sure about that. That's an interesting, I'll have to look that up and see. But anyway, so Don Chipp was a member of the Liberal Party, very well respected, and classic small L Liberal. And he got disenchanted, I think, with actually Malcolm Fraser, who he saw as too right-wing. Malcolm Fraser finally regarded the Liberal Party as too right-wing, and Malcolm Fraser resigned from the Liberal Party. Okay? People have to get this in mind. There's been a huge shift in the actual nature of the Liberal Party over time. That first of all, you had people like Don Chipp, who was a very genuinely progressive, politically progressive person who was a member, and he resigned because he regarded Malcolm Fraser as too right-wing. Then you fast forward to the 1990s when Fraser's Lieutenant Howard has taken over, and at some point Fraser let his membership lapse, and he was asked, why did you leave the Liberal Party? And his answer was, the Liberal Party left me.
Yeah.
And so this huge shift from a mixture of progressive and conservative views, a fundamentally secular approach, nothing like the Republicans in America. Now we find ourselves with a party which is pure right-wing, quite reactionary, imprisons refugees, whereas Malcolm Fraser first of all, threw open the borders of Australia to let in refugees from Cambodia and refugees from Vietnam. That's why Australia's got this incredible mixture of cultures these days that I think was one of the things Australians like myself used to be, still are, very proud of, that happened. To where Howard's, is about to lose an election in 1999, when he's looking like he's going to lose the election to Kim Beazley, and then a hapless boat of refugees turned up and was rescued by the Tampa, which was a Norwegian freighter, and the Norwegian captain, to his absolute honour, took the people on board, because that's what you're supposed to do with people you find in distress in the ocean. It's an unconditional responsibility of a captain at sea to pick up people who are in distress, and then to take them to the nearest country, which happened to be Australia, and John Howard refused to let them in, which was a breach of the laws of international
Well, it was worse than that, wasn't it? Because we had the children overboard scandal, you might remember, where there were photographs that were released of kids in the water, and people were going, in the newspapers, releasing in front page news, and people were going, how scandalous, these refugees will do anything, even chucking their own kids into the water. There's a question mark about where that photograph came from, and then afterwards it was discovered actually it had been cropped to show that actually they were swimming from one vessel to another with people around them. I mean, it was the whole thing was a staged
total
to
fabrication.
To make public sentiment against refugees even greater than it already was. So when you've got them. There's the thing. You've got so Don Shipp started the Democrats, the Australian Democrats. They were trying to do exactly what the New Liberals. It was
not quite, but let's come back to that.
But they're trying to be the party in the middle. The Democrats failed on that, and part of the reason they failed, part of the reason they failed, though, I'd suggest, is because of the role that Murdoch and Australian media and also right wing shock jocks like 2GB and Alan Jones on TV every night are spinning all these stories, and the power of the media is just so great that people go along with it, and it's hard to. So it's breaking the mold of politics, but you've got to break the mold of the Australian media, which is harder.
And that's one of the intentions of the New Liberals as well. But let's actually go back to Don Shipp for a second. Don Shipp's, having seen what he saw as underhand behaviour inside the Liberal Party and not particularly good behaviour by Labor at the same time, his slogan was "Keep the bastards honest." Well, Victor's slogan, and you can see it on his pinned tweet, is "We'll put the bastards behind bars." He said it's gone well past the point with the case of keeping them honest. No bloody way they're honest. And they've done stuff which is absolutely corrupt. The only reason they've got away with it is that they don't face any regulation or any oversight of whether they're behaving in an ethical fashion or not. So we're going to have a national level independent commission against corruption, which will be set up in such a way that it can't be unfunded, won't be chaired by lawyers, but by people from. I think the idea is, I'm not sure about this part, but I think it is that it'll be sort of publicly respected people on the board, not the legal eagles, and with the capacity retrospectively to put people in jail for what is corrupt behaviour, and that might include such things as using a sporting grant to give money to Liberal Party marginal seats to try to buy their vote at the next election. That sort of thing. So it is much, much tougher than what was proposed for the Democrats.
But what you're talking about, rightly or wrongly, I mean, it's a grubby world, politics, isn't it? And my concern would be that you then get wrapped up in that sort of thing where you're saying, well, these people have misbehaved, therefore they need to be brought to justice, and that's the role of us to try and clean up the act. That's just dealing with the past. It's sort of trying to clean up the past. It's not actually developing a progressive approach for the country.
And
it's that's dirty politics.
That's why we keep on saying take a look at the webpage, because I've still got to write the economic policy. Everybody who's doing this is doing it as a non-politician, so there's not a single person who's had a career in politics is part of the advisory group, let alone part of the candidates. And so we're doing this stuff when we have time in our day jobs. And, my day job is rather busy. So I'm a bit behind time on writing up the economic policy and the housing policy. But the focus is that we have a whole range of reforms we need, and we need to have people with expertise who are not driven by ideology putting those forward. So, for example, one of the most recent people to join the party as an advisor is Simon Chapman. Now, you might have been around. I don't know if it was true or not. Do you remember the anti-smoking ads in Australia?
No. But I mean,
okay.
But I do like the fact that Australia, more than most countries, has tackled smoking. Like, you can't. So.
And a large part of the reason for that was one Simon Chapman, because Simon came up with the slogan. And by the way, we talk about Morrison as being Scotty from marketing, and send up things like he's crazy. When he was director of Australian tourism, before he was sacked from the job, he came with the slogan, "Where the bloody hell are you?" As a tourism ad for Australia. Well, Simon's gem about smoking, rather than saying it's bad for your health, blah, 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 was kiss a non-smoker, enjoy the difference. Did you ever see that one?
No.
You didn't
but he's
see it?
dead
Okay.
right. My first wife was a smoker. Yeah.
I've had the same experience. Two lips meeting, and in the middle is a strawberry. That was the most effective anti-smoking campaign ever, and so Simon was part of that. And this is the sort of person which are being attracted to what Victor's trying to achieve, because what we are all been grumbling about for 20, 30, 40 years is the decline in the standard of ethics in politics in general, but particularly, of course, in Australia, our home country. And bloody you can't trust them, etc. They're morons, blah, blah, blah. And you go on past the next drink. And in that situation, Victor found himself in the same situation and finally said, what about we form our own party? And he developed a set of general principles, some of which are rather neoliberal in sound, I must say, from my own point of view, but about freedom and freedom of movement, blah, blah, blah. But a set of core principles. And he found everybody agreed with the core principles. So he thought, well, maybe I should try forming a party around it. And that was the genesis of the New Liberals. And then when people like myself looked at this, and this includes Simon, I congratulated Simon for signing on, and he said he couldn't fault the policies that he saw being put forward by the New Liberals. So he thought it was time for a change. And we're both in our late 60s. Victor's 69, I'm 68. I think Simon's my age or slightly older.
Right.
None of us need to do this.
Yeah. We're ready to give up on life and become politicians. Yeah. So
something like that.
So we'll talk about the policies in a second. But why the name New Liberals? The New Liberals was, by the way, that's what the Democrats were formed from. Looking it up. Oh,
right. Okay. The New Liberals.
So it's been used before, but it was used back then. And I'm just wondering. I mean, and it makes sense in their case because they came from the Liberal Party, whereas you're not coming from the Liberal Party. And there's a danger. I think it's the wrong name, because I think there's a danger. It could be read the other way, where you've got people going, "Oh yeah, well I hate the Liberals, so the New Liberals are going to be even worse." Or you have the right wing of the Liberal Party going, "Yeah, they're not right enough. So let's get it's great. We've got the New Liberals. They must be more They must be more liberal than the Liberal." But for those people from outside Australia, the Liberal Party, by the way, is the right wing party. It's like the Conservative Party in the UK, possibly even more right wing. So actually, maybe not lately, but but so it's. I mean, I don't know. It's the wrong name. I think. I don't know what you call it. Well, you just call the New Democrats might be.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's a possibility too, I must say. But the reason that Victor chose the name before any of us, decided to jump on board. I went through the same reaction. Huh? Pardon?
You're getting to change it.
Well, we've been forced to. There's two main reasons why he chose it. The first is he's looking back to the Rousseau vision of a liberal, the 19th century philosophical principle liberalism, John Stuart Mill and so on, and the idea of and even Voltaire, I disagree with you fundamentally, but I'll fight to the death your right to say what you believe. That's that sort of idea of liberalism as freedom of expression. That was one thing. Secondly,
from back then, okay, but
from back then,
hold your thought on the second one. Just on that, isn't it? toxic in politics to start anything that seems to be harping back to the old days. And that would be my other big concern about it as well. That we're doing what would have been tried decades ago, and we're going to do it. We're going to give it another go. And people go, well, hang on, life's moved on a bit now. Are you guys going to be just the wasn't life great in the old days party?
Yeah, and that is quite a feasible perspective. I mean, I don't think that the classic 19th century liberalism is going to work in a world of incredible supply shortages and global warming and, a catastrophic decline in our capacity to produce. So those sorts of things are, it's just a name that was started with, and then the classic thing is it was also thinking that you have so many people who themselves can't bring themselves to vote Labor. Like it's the same thing again for Americans. Imagine somebody who's voted Republican all their life and they think I'm going to start voting Democrat. I can't do it. I'll hold my nose and vote for the Republican, even though I'm a progressive Republican. That there must be a few of them left in the United States. So same sort of thing for Australia. People vote Liberal because they can't bring themselves to vote for the Labor Party. But their principles are more like Don Chipp and Malcolm Fraser, who these days would be regarded as on the left of the Liberal Party, and that's sort of partially the cohort we're aiming for, or Victor was aiming for by forming the party, and he also made a commitment which has not been broken despite how the Labor Party has behaved towards the New Liberal sense, that there would be no candidate run in a Labor seat. So this is one thing which I hope we've still got some foreign listeners listening in on this one, not non-Australian listeners. But the Australian political system is very different to America or the UK. It's more like Europe in the sense that there's proportional representation in the main chamber, in the second chamber of the Senate, which is the one that I'm now running for. So if there's 6 positions available, if you get 1/6 plus 1 vote, or 1/7 plus 1 vote, then you get elected. But in both that and the lower house, there's preferential voting. So you don't vote just tick next to one candidate, which is the American or the UK system. You vote for all candidates in numbered sequence. If you don't fill out all numbers, then your vote's invalid. But if you vote for the what was some of the great parties in the UK, the Raving Loony Party, for example?
Yeah, Monster Raving Loony Party. Yeah, that's right. Well, they never. Okay. But they had in the Australian Senate. So you stand a chance here, Steve, because there were people like the Motoring Enthusiasts Party, for example, who got a seat because of this very complex...
And the Shooters Party.
But I mean, even more obscure because, what you're describing, you pass on your preference to somebody else and then they can pass their preferences on. So you can actually have one vote where that preference gets passed on several times to a very obscure party which didn't get very many votes but got lots of preference votes and somehow find themselves fronting a senator. It was a bit of
as a voter, like the last time I voted in Australia back in before 2014, I left the country to go and work in the UK. But it happened, I was in Surrey Hills electorate at the time, and there was the Sex Party there.
Right.
And there's also the Marijuana Party, and there was this is actually on the House of Reps, so voting for winning the seat of Surrey Hills. I've forgotten what it's actually called, but that particular seat in the Australian Parliament was up for grabs. This might have been a state election, actually. So the Sex Party, the Marijuana Party, and then Fred Nile was also running, who's an arch reactionary religious jerk. So I gave my preference to Sex Party first, Marijuana Party second, then third last was Labor, second last was Liberal, and third was Fred Nile. And you can have it makes election day a bit more fun, if you actually get in. You can actually do this sort of stuff. Knowing that, my vote would ultimately go to the Labor Party. Okay. Now, that wouldn't happen in the UK.
But you're working on the outside chance that maybe the Sex Party would get in. But if they didn't, then your vote went to Labour. But
the Sex Party might, and then it could have been the Marijuana Party. If you get so it's possible even in a representative seat election where there's only one person who's going to be elected. It's possible that if one of the non-Labor, non-Liberal, so to say non-Democrat, non-Republican voters gets more than either the Republican or the Democrat, then let's say it's a situation for Australia which we're hoping for. Let's take North Sydney as the case, because this is why I'm running for election, because Victor decided the party was seen to be doing well enough that it's worth having a punt at getting the leader into the House of Representatives rather than into the Senate. So he decided, he was the prime Senate candidate, he decided to become the Senate candidate, the local electorate candidate for North Sydney, which is where he lives. Now, in North Sydney, it's a very wealthy community which normally has a very small Labor vote. Often Labor doesn't bother running. But if you had Labor and Liberal in North Sydney and you had one independent running, it's quite possible that the independent could get ahead of Labor, and then all of Labor's preferences would go to the independent before they would go to the Liberal, and then the independent ends up beating the Liberal. So you might get Liberal getting, say, let's say Liberal gets 49% of the vote, and Labor gets 24. I'm doing it badly. 24%, and you get Liberal gets 27%. 27 plus 24 becomes 51, and the independent wins the election against the Liberal Party.
Yeah.
So you can play that sort of game in Australia. You can't play it in America or the UK, and because we can play, that gives us more of a chance.
Right. Yeah, but I wonder how great the chance is though, because when you've got to confront the media, like I was talking about before. So you've got to confront the likes of, for example, on 2GB, where you've got Sky News, you've got the ABC, which have to be neutral on all things, and by being neutral, they, as a public broadcaster, they'll never delve down in the detail. And what your party will be bringing is a detailed argument, not a soundbite argument, but the media loves to deal in soundbites. So, like, mid-mornings on 2GB, one of their popular broadcasters, he's not very smart, he's an ex-taxi driver, is Ray Hadley, who's, the new Alan Jones, is one of these blokes who talks a bit like this, and
I've spoken to Ray on a couple of occasions. Actually, he's a bit more of a thinker than you might expect.
Oh, really?
Anyway,
okay. But
yeah.
But he would destroy you, I fear, because he'd be there going.
Well, no, Ray's had me on. I've actually argued non-orthodox economics on Ray's program, and I'll be happy to do it again in the guise of the New Liberals. So,
really,
like Alan,
because he would be there.
Jones's show,
you spend Alan Jones. Really? Well, John Law isn't so bad, is he? But I mean, Alan Jones, well, Ray Hadley would be there. I mean, I know what they'd be saying. First of all, I mean, if I was their producer feeding them the lines, she'd be there going, well, so we've got this. He's Australian originally, but, he's not lived here for how many, 10 years or whatever. He's an academic, another one of these academics who believes he can be a politician. But just look at these crazy policies that he wants to come up with. He wants to.
That's quite possible.
He's going to be telling us that we should have a basic income, so you don't have to work. So you can,
and he wants to reduce house prices.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for those, So if you're struggling to get a job, don't worry about it because the state's going to look after you. But where's all that money going to come from? Steve Keen is going to create it out of nothing at all through this thing called modern monetary theory. It doesn't sound very modern to me. It sounds like taking us back to the Dark Ages. So money for everybody, eh, Steve Keen? Simple.
Mm-hmm. Hey, you've nailed it. Yeah,
and you're going to get it all the time.
I'll say yes. And then, and if he laughs, I say, okay, if you're not going to listen, I'll talk on Twitter instead. But if you want to have a listen, here's how the logic works. And you may have noticed that Australians had an 11% increase in their savings under the pandemic, which is surprising anybody. Have you noticed that that's pretty much the scale of the deficit? Et cetera, et cetera. In other words, government deficits create private surpluses, blah, blah, blah. Give it a try. If we don't get listened to, the main thing we're hoping on is that the really big difference between this and previous elections, certainly in Don Chipp's day with the Democrats, is the role of social media. So Twitter, is a bit of an echo chamber nonetheless, but it's an echo chamber a lot of people tap into and journalists do as well. TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, etc., etc. It's possible to undercut the mainstream media. And one of the targets that Victor very much has in his sights is breaking up the Murdoch media. There should never be a level of concentration like this in media. And Australia's got states where 100% of the media is owned by Murdoch. That should never have been allowed, and we'll break it up. So yeah, we're going to and also we're going to break some toes in this process.
Of course, everyone is going to point to 2008 and the bet that you had with Rory Robertson about house prices.
Oh, yeah, I'm going to cop that one for sure.
You said they were going to fall by 40%. They didn't. They've gone up and a lot since then. And you had to do the big walk. Did you do the big walk, by the way?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I realised that whole thing was a.
Oh, you had a T-shirt saying, "Yeah, I was wrong about house prices. Ask me why." Yeah.
See, that was sprung on me at a debate in Parliament House by Rory, in the Parliamentary Library, when I'd never met Rory before, and never heard him before, and he then started by saying that I was famous for making this call on house prices. And I thought, well, I made the call on the 7:30 report. You don't end up on the 7:30 report unless you're already famous for other reasons. But anyway, and he goes and says that you set a prices of 40%, and you can hear me on the recording saying over the top of him, over 10 to 15 years, mate, but I'm willing to stand by it. So in that sense, I think we're talking in 2008, so the statute of limitations on that was 2023. We never shook hands. We never agreed to details. I'm a fairly informal bloke. You and I've never shaken hands over the deal we have on Patreon, and we both live up to it because we're both ethical people. But I realised that's the last way you describe the property lobby. And I thought before the bet was put to me, Rudd had doubled and trebled the amount of money given to first-time buyers, what he called the first-time owners boost, and I called the first-time vendors boost. So I knew prices are going to rise in the immediate term, just under the pressure of that boost.
Well, so on that, just on house prices. Okay, I hear your point. But it doesn't matter. You get a very long explanation to what is going to be leveled at you time and time again. But just on that,
absolutely.
On house prices and trying to bring them down to size, most Australians are not going to like that. It's very hard to vote for somebody who's going to say we're going to devalue your house.
This is one reason that working with Victor has been quite intriguing, because obviously that was the point. If you're going to bring house prices down, people are going to, my asset's falling in value. What you actually want to keep together is the equity you've got. So if you have, house prices fall and you still owe the same amount of money, your equity's fallen. Our whole idea is both to reduce house prices, but also to reduce private debt.
Right. So if I've got 250,000 equity in £1 million house, and what you'd see you'd want to get that house price down to $500,000, for example.
Let's say 800,000. Let's not be too radical, but 800,000, and your debt falls to 550. So you've still got 250,000 in equity, and you've got a lower level of debt. So it's actually easier for you to pay down the remaining debt.
Right. So how do you do that? How do
you have a combination? You have this is one thing I've been delayed for, because I've got to give a couple of talks in the United States and Europe next week on climate change. So I haven't finished writing up the policy. But the basic idea is we're going to use what we call the PIL, the property income limited leverage, to legislate that you can offer initially no more than, say, 15 times the rental income of a property. We're going to legislate what's called the property income limited leverage, so that the maximum amount of money that can be borrowed to buy a house would be some multiple of the annual rental income, actual or imputed, of that house. And we'd start, say, at 15, because at the moment it's probably about 20. Okay, so that would say if you wanted to go and buy a house and you would previously have been allowed to get $1 million, we'll reduce that to 750,000 by just banning any high level leverage on the basis of the price of the house.
But if I sold my house for $1 million and I've paid it off in full, and the maximum I can sell it for is 800, I'm $200,000 worse off.
Which is where the modern debt jubilee comes in, because the whole idea is to reduce leverage. We've allowed far too much private debt to be accumulated. All the fetishizing of the level of government debt has ignored that Australia now has the second highest level of household debt in the world after Switzerland, the third highest ever after Denmark, and quite possibly Australia will be in first place after a while, given the bubble that's currently down there. So we have the most indebted households on the planet. That's got to be reduced, and we can do it using the accounting that lies behind modern monetary theory, giving everybody an injection of money from the government. That's saying, quite possibly, it wouldn't be necessarily all done at once. It'd be done gradually. But an idea of, if you gave everybody over 16 or over 18 $100,000, which had to be used to pay their debt down, you also give it to people who don't have debt, and they get money that they can use to buy a housing asset, for example. So you enable the debt level. The people who, the example you gave a moment ago, they got $1 million house and like a $750,000 mortgage. Then after it, they'd have an $800,000 house and a $550,000 mortgage. They've still got $250,000 in equity, and in fact, because the debt level's risen while their incomes have remained the same, they've got more capacity to pay that debt down than they had beforehand. So you'd actually come out better for any people who currently own a home, while the reduction in price would mean that the young who are excluded from being able to buy a house can now potentially save for a deposit.
Right. But my other point was, what happens if I haven't got any debt and I've paid off the full $1 million, but I can only sell my house for $800,000? Then I'm out of pocket by $200,000.
Plus, you've got $200,000 from the modern debt jubilee. What are you complaining about?
Well, yeah, okay, that's nice. But if I still had a mortgage, I'd be getting that $200,000 plus. I'd be getting the
no.
equity.
If you got debt, your debt falls. If you haven't got debt, your buying capacity rises. Everybody gets the same amount of money.
Right.
And this is again intended to equalise, because with the distribution of income and debt, it's the poor who get screwed by high levels of private debt. And so by reducing the overall level of private debt, you benefit the poor more than you benefit the rich.
Right. Try saying all of this in 30-second soundbites on TV. So you'd need a roadmap.
It's going to be fun.
It is going to be fun. But you need a roadmap to get there so that people can follow and understand. And yeah. So look, well, good luck with it all. I mean, my difficulty with it is that it changes our working relationship, because I work for, most of my income comes from an Australian bank who almost certainly would not like me to be in any form of joint venture with a politician. So it makes it hard. So I'm sort of hoping, for Australia, I hope you get there. Selfishly, I hope you don't. So we can keep, because I don't know how it changes our working relationship a little bit. But anyway, I guess. So what are you giving your chances of being successful in this?
I'd sort of say 1 in 5. I mean, with the Senate, you need, first past the post, you need 14.5% of the population of the state to vote for you, fundamentally, 1/7. Because of the preferential distribution, you can potentially get there with 8%. And we're hoping that with a combination of the recognition that the New Liberals have got, courtesy of Victor's campaigning on social media, and the team we're pulling together, and then my own name recognition, maybe we'll get to the point where with the compulsory preferential, maybe we'll get past the 8 or 9% vote, and I'll get a seat. So it's not out of the realms of possibility. And the reason I'm doing it is because Victor decided to shift from the Senate to the House of Reps, so he had to get a replacement. He thought I was the best replacement.
Right. So how many senators are they putting forward? How many seats in the Senate are they putting forward?
Oh, they're going to go for 6. I mean, this is another part of it. Where, people who don't know the Australian system, there are 12 senators per state, and 6 of them are elected every election. So the term is 2 electoral cycles, which is a maximum of 6 years. So therefore, to get elected, you need 1/7 plus 1 vote to get in. So there's six each time, and therefore the major parties put forward 6 candidates. The smaller party, because it costs, I think it's $2,000 to register each candidate, then it tends to be too expensive for some of the small parties to have more than 2 or 3. But we're going the whole hog. We'll have, in each state, we're going to have 6 candidates.
Right. And you can see them all at thenewliberals.net.au. There's your smiling photo taken many years ago. And yeah, we'll see how it goes, Steve. We'll watch with interest. And the timing for this is going to be sometime next year, but we don't really quite know when.
Yeah, that's the Prime Minister has the right to call an election up to 9 months before he has to call one, which is on a 3-year term.
And so when does he have to call the next one then?
Has to call it by May.
All right.
And some thought he's going to call it in March or for March. They call it, Malcolm McKerris, if you remember that old name from Australia, the electoral analyst, he argues Morrison will announce the election on Australia Day for I think March 13. That's his call. We're sort of hoping that won't happen. We want more momentum than that. And I've got a feeling Morrison will be so on the nose the time he's going to delay for as long as possible.
Well, you never know. Either now or at the last possible moment, because things aren't going to get, as they vaccinate and they find that things haven't bounced back as quick as they'd hope, it's going to be looking pretty bad for him, I would have thought. So if he doesn't go now, he's got to go right at the very end. Yeah. Oh, well, okay. Well, so there's what's your question about your policy on COVID? Because that obviously will be front and centre as well. But that's a conversation for another day. This is not going to become a party political broadcast, Steve. No. We've got to stop it. Nip it in the bud now.
Okay, that's right. Just one. Back to the issues. Yep. Okay. Cool with me.
All right. Good talk. Catch you next time.
Okay, bye.
And we haven't recorded it yet, but we'll try and squeeze in another podcast this week before the end of the week, which is looking more at issues than politics, I think. That's it for today, though. I'm Phil Dobbie with Steve Keen. Catch you next time. Thanks for listening.